The Galactic Council had spoken, their directive clear. The alien warlord received his orders and, without hesitation, acted upon them. Humanity, a species whose resilience and tenacity were often mocked by the warlord and his empire, would be taught a brutal lesson. A contingent of human prisoners had been captured after a fierce battle, and rather than offering them the faintest glimmer of mercy, the warlord chose to make an example of them. To him, they were mere insects, reminders of an increasingly bothersome species that refused to submit. The prisoners, bound and injured, understood the grim future awaiting them. Yet even in these moments of darkness, they shared glances filled not with fear, but with resolve. They knew the odds they had faced, and they knew how few of them would likely survive. But they had a plan, a final act of defiance that would ripple far beyond the cold walls of their cells. Unknown to their captors, the prisoners had managed to record a message, a final, heartfelt plea. This wasn't a call for vengeance, or a desperate cry for rescue. Instead, it was something far more powerful. Each of them had contributed, their voices weaving a message of unity, peace, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of understanding between species. They spoke of family, friends, dreams, and hopes, of the beauty they had seen in the galaxy, even in the midst of war. In their final words, they asked for something beyond survival. They asked for empathy, for a chance to see an end to the violence. As their time drew near, the prisoners held their heads high, knowing that their message, if it ever reached Earth, could potentially reshape the galaxy. Their courage was not born from a naive belief in miracles but from the quiet, unwavering strength of those who had accepted their fate but refused to go quietly. The warlord, however, saw none of this. In his mind, the executions were merely another day's work, a routine reminder of his authority. He addressed the prisoners with cold contempt, relishing the sight of what he saw as humanity's weakness. Little did he know, every word of his was recorded alongside the prisoners' message. His chilling final address would stand as a stark contrast to their message of peace. Then, one by one, the prisoners met their end. The warlord watched, pleased with the display of dominance he had orchestrated. But what he hadn't accounted for was the resilience of the human spirit. For all his power, he lacked understanding of the bond humans shared, a bond that transcended space and time, that connected them even in the darkest hours. Among the warlord's own ranks, there was one who couldn't ignore the impact of the prisoner's words. An alien guard, who had once doubted humanity, now found himself shaken. The quiet dignity of the prisoners, their call for peace even in the face of death, it all haunted him. Acting on a rare impulse of compassion, he took a risk. He smuggled the recording out of the warship, determined to ensure their words would not die in silence. The journey of the message was far from simple. Transmissions across such vast distances could be intercepted, blocked, or simply lost. But fate, or perhaps the universe itself, seemed to align with the prisoner's final wish. Against all odds, the recording made it back to human territories. When the first human officials heard it, they were moved to tears. Hardened generals, seasoned diplomats, civilians, everyone who listened felt an indescribable mix of sorrow, pride, and determination. The recording spread like wildfire. Within hours, every human world, every colony, had access to it. News networks played it on a continuous loop, and social channels filled with expressions of grief and support. But more than anything, there was a shared feeling of resolve. This was not a call to arms, but a call to solidarity, a demand for justice without resorting to the same brutality the prisoners had endured. People from all walks of life joined in mourning, and in remembering, pledging to honor those lost by fighting not with weapons but with unity and dignity. The allies of humanity, though culturally distinct, felt the weight of the recording as well. Species who had once doubted humanity's strength now saw a side they had never understood, a quiet but profound resilience, an ability to hope even in despair. The prisoner's message, though born from suffering, had transcended human boundaries, reaching the hearts of alien allies who began to understand the essence of humanity. Across the galaxy, gatherings were held to honor the fallen. Vigils were lit on planets with skies of every color, cities where humans and aliens stood side by side, united by the shared desire for a future where such atrocities would no longer occur. And the warlord, though unaware of the impact of his actions, had unwittingly created the greatest threat to his rule, a coalition born not of vengeance but of shared ideals and dreams. In the quiet moments that followed, the galaxy began to change. The sacrifices of the prisoners, their final words, had sparked something no warlord could have foreseen, a unity that went beyond borders and species. This alliance, forged in the fires of loss but tempered by hope, would become a beacon, a reminder that even the smallest spark of humanity could light up the darkest corners of the universe. The message made its way across the vastness of space, reaching Earth with an urgency that defied explanation. As soon as it touched down, humanity responded, as if every person, every colony, had been holding their breath until that moment. The recording was played on screens large and small, its words resonating with everyone who listened. Those who had known the prisoners personally were the first to feel the blow: families, friends, and comrades who recognized the voices, who remembered the faces of those who had once laughed, loved, and dreamed beside them. The words of the recording spread like a quiet storm, a force that couldn't be stopped. It was not a battle cry, but a testament to what humanity stood for. Listeners were struck by the prisoners' refusal to descend into hate, even after everything they had endured. They spoke of peace, of their hopes for a future where understanding could prevail, and it was clear that they had believed in that vision until their final moments. The restraint and compassion in their words, especially given their circumstances, stirred something deep in every listener, something powerful and undeniable. As the message continued to circulate, human cities began to hold gatherings to honor the fallen. Streets that had once buzzed with activity fell silent as people paused to reflect, to listen, and to mourn. Young and old, civilians and soldiers, they stood side by side, paying tribute to those whose courage had reached across the stars. Even those who had never known the prisoners were touched, swept up in the collective grief and admiration. They were more than just fallen soldiers now, they had become symbols, embodying the resilience, unity, and hope that humanity held dear. But the message didn't only resonate with humanity. Across the galaxy, the message found its way into the ears of humanity's allies. Species with cultures, values, and histories vastly different from humanity's felt an inexplicable kinship with those final words. Empathy, that most universal of feelings, broke down barriers that diplomacy and politics had never managed to cross. Allies and even former rivals found themselves moved by the prisoners' plea for peace, by the courage and hope that could exist even in the darkest of circumstances. Allied worlds began to join humanity in their vigils, their own traditions and rituals blending with those of humans. They lit fires, held quiet gatherings, and, in some cases, even adopted some of the human practices for mourning. In one alien world, where songs were sung only in moments of collective sorrow, a hymn was composed in memory of the fallen humans. The haunting notes carried their voices far and wide, joining the galaxy in shared mourning and solidarity. As the days went on, the momentum built. This was no longer a singular moment of grief, it was a movement. The message had struck a chord that echoed across every corner of known space, turning sorrow into purpose. A growing coalition of humans and alien allies, deeply affected by the message, began to organize, not for war but for justice. They didn't want revenge, nor did they demand retaliation. Instead, they sought something more lasting, something that would stand as a reminder of the prisoners' sacrifice. They wanted an end to the violence, a future that aligned with the prisoners' final words. Those who had known violence began to see another way, a new path forward where peace wasn't just a distant dream but a genuine possibility. The message had become more than a recording. It was now a rallying cry, a call for unity across borders and species. And those who listened, who truly understood, felt compelled to honor that call, to make sure that the prisoners' words would shape the galaxy's future. For the first time, former rivals reached out to humanity, not with weapons but with open hands. Species who had once viewed humans with suspicion now saw them as allies, united in a vision that transcended differences. It was a fragile alliance, yes, but one that held promise, one that carried the potential to create a legacy that would last far beyond any one species or empire. As the momentum grew, the warlord and his empire began to feel the pressure. News of the movement reached them, and the empire, so sure of its own power, suddenly felt something it hadn't in generations: doubt. What they had dismissed as weakness, as naivety, had transformed into a force strong enough to challenge their grip on power. They hadn't anticipated that a handful of prisoners, through a single act of defiance, could unite a galaxy. Back on Earth and throughout allied worlds, the prisoners' message continued to inspire, to move people to action. And as humanity and its allies stood together, the recording echoed in every heart, a reminder of what was possible and a testament to the power of compassion, even in the darkest of times. The memory of the fallen had not been lost. It had been transformed into a new kind of power, one that no weapon could destroy, one that would change the galaxy forever. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session, the chambers filled with tension. News of the message's impact had reached them, and the council members were faced with a crisis they hadn't foreseen. The council was an assembly of powerful species, each one used to enforcing their will across the galaxy. Yet now, their power seemed shaken by something intangible, a movement grounded in ideals they had long dismissed as impractical. Some council members argued that the humans had become a threat to the established order. The message's influence was spreading at a rate that alarmed them. They worried that if left unchecked, humanity's ideals could destabilize the entire region, encouraging other species to question the Council's authority. Others, however, saw the situation differently. They argued that suppressing humanity's message would only strengthen it, transforming a peaceful movement into a dangerous resistance. The Council was split, each side presenting arguments that reflected not just political strategy but their core beliefs about control, governance, and the nature of peace. One of the more senior council members, an elder from a long-lived species known for its diplomatic prowess, spoke up. She pointed out that the humans were demonstrating a strength that was not rooted in weapons or power, but in something far deeper. These ideals, she said, her voice carrying a note of caution, cannot simply be erased by force. The more we push against them, the more they will spread. Her words unsettled the council members who believed in maintaining control through power alone, but her insight was difficult to dismiss. As the council debated, the reports from across the galaxy painted a picture they could no longer ignore. Planets under the council's influence were showing sympathy for humanity. There were protests, vigils, and public statements from worlds that had, until now, shown little interest in the Empire's conflicts. The movement was inspiring hope, a dangerous emotion that the Council had long suppressed to maintain order. The message was giving species a reason to look beyond their own borders, to consider a unity that wasn't enforced by the Council but chosen by the people. Amid the discussions, a younger Council member raised the concern that the situation might already be beyond their control. If we continue down this path, he warned, we risk creating exactly what we fear, a united front against the Council's influence. His words lingered in the room, resonating with the growing realization that a new power was emerging, not through war but through the bonds formed by shared ideals. The Council's members were experts in politics and strategy, but they found themselves unprepared for this kind of resistance. Another faction within the Council suggested that they should make a public gesture, a show of regret, or even an apology for the prisoners' deaths. This proposal shocked many. Apologies were a sign of weakness in their culture, an admission that could undermine their authority. Yet the suggestion gained traction, as the Council members recognized that their usual methods of control, intimidation, suppression, and isolation, were ineffective against a movement grounded in peace and unity. The elder Council member, seeing the shifting attitudes around her, proposed a compromise. She suggested that instead of an apology, they could initiate reforms, presenting it as a way to align with the evolving values of the galaxy. This approach would allow them to maintain their dignity while acknowledging the message's impact. Some council members bristled at the idea of conceding to humanity in any form, but the reality of the situation was pressing down on them, forcing them to consider solutions that just weeks ago would have been unthinkable. The council spent hours debating, torn between their fear of losing control and the need to adapt to a rapidly changing galaxy. Each proposal, each point of contention, highlighted the deepening divide within the Council. For centuries, they had ruled through strength, presenting a united front that made resistance seem futile. But now, in the face of a message of peace, their unity was fracturing. Their traditional methods of control were being challenged not by an army, but by ideals that resonated on a level they had not anticipated. As the debate continued, they began to realize that the humans, without intending to, had uncovered a vulnerability in the Council's rule. The Council had always relied on the assumption that fear would keep dissent in check. But the prisoner's message, with its plea for peace and unity, had proven that fear was no longer a sufficient deterrent. This message had shown species across the galaxy a glimpse of a different future, one where unity was chosen, not imposed. The session ended without a clear decision, the Council members more divided than ever. But as they left the chamber, it was evident that something fundamental had shifted. The Council's power was no longer as unassailable as it had once seemed. Humanity had, perhaps unknowingly, given the galaxy a reason to question the status quo. And the Council, for all its power, found itself grappling with the realization that ideals could be just as powerful as any weapon. In the quiet aftermath, the Council members retreated to their own quarters, each one haunted by the same thought. The movement humanity had sparked was more than just a reaction to the prisoners' deaths. It was a reminder that even the most established regimes could be challenged, not through force, but through the simple, enduring strength of hope and unity. As word of the Galactic Council's hesitation spread, a new movement took shape across allied worlds and beyond. Humans and their allies, unified by the prisoner's final message, began forming coalitions, not of military power but of purpose. Across human worlds, there was a growing realization that the strength of their message had already created an unbreakable alliance. This wasn't just about justice for those lost, it was about ensuring that such cruelty could never happen again. The coalition took form quietly at first, with gatherings in various cities and digital spaces where leaders from different worlds came together. The discussions focused on how best to honor the message of the prisoners, how to maintain unity without becoming like the empire they opposed. They sought to build a foundation not on domination or fear but on mutual respect, understanding, and the principles the prisoners had died for. This alliance wasn't born of treaties or political alliances but from shared ideals, a vision of a galaxy that could transcend the limits imposed by the Council's rigid authority. As the coalition grew, more and more species added their voices. Some had once been neutral, while others had held long-standing tensions with humanity. But the message had bridged those gaps, making enemies into allies and former rivals into friends. Across different worlds, species with no history of cooperation found themselves standing side by side, united by a common cause that went beyond borders. The very diversity of the coalition became its strength, a testament to the prisoner's vision that understanding could thrive even amidst differences. With this newfound unity, the coalition drafted a declaration, a document that reflected the ideals that had drawn them together. It wasn't a declaration of war but a statement of intent, a commitment to protect each other, to seek justice, and to defend against any forces that threatened peace. The document echoed the words of the prisoners, carrying forward their hope for a better future and their refusal to let hatred define them. It served as both a reminder of what they had lost and a pledge to build something greater. As the declaration spread, worlds under the Council's influence began to feel the ripple effects. The Empire, once secure in its control, found itself on uncertain ground. No longer was it simply facing human resistance, it was now confronting a coalition that spanned species, languages, and cultures. The Council members, who had once dismissed humanity as a minor threat, now faced a force they hadn't anticipated, a galaxy united not by conquest but by choice. The coalition's influence began to permeate even the Council's strongholds. Word of their unity and ideals reached alien populations that had long lived under the Council's control. Whispers of change spread, and within these worlds, citizens began to look to the coalition as a beacon of hope, something that could offer them a future without fear or oppression. The Council could see that the ideals they had long dismissed were now fueling a movement they were powerless to contain. Back on Earth and across human worlds, there was a sense of purpose that had never existed before. Humanity had often stood alone, weathering challenges with resilience, but this alliance was something new, something that gave them strength beyond their own capabilities. They were no longer just defending themselves, they were leading a vision that had united countless others, a role they took on with a sense of honor and responsibility. For the first time, humans were seen as more than just another species in the galaxy. They were the ones who had sparked a change that others could rally behind. As the coalition grew, they began to take action, not through force but through peaceful demonstrations and strategic alliances. They approached planets with offers of support, assistance, and the promise of a future where independence and peace were possible. The movement had no borders, no single leader. It was an alliance that represented the collective hopes of countless worlds. The Council's authority, once seen as unshakable, was now challenged by the simple power of solidarity. In the end, the Council had no choice but to respond. Under immense pressure from both inside and outside their ranks, they issued a statement of acknowledgement. They stopped short of an apology, but the admission was there, thinly veiled, a recognition that the deaths of the prisoners had been a mistake, a misjudgment that had sparked a movement they could no longer ignore. It was a small step, but it was enough for the coalition to take heart, to recognize that even the Council was not beyond the reach of change. In the months that followed, the coalition continued to grow, with more worlds joining and pledging their support. Humanity, once isolated in its struggle, had now become the heart of an alliance that stood for more than survival. It stood for a future that held the promise of understanding, respect, and a peace that no empire could control. The memory of the fallen prisoners, their final message, had become the foundation of a new galaxy, one where ideals could carry as much weight as any weapon, and where even the most powerful council could be held accountable. The galaxy was forever changed, and those who had lost their lives in silence had, through their words, shaped the course of history. The coalition was their legacy, a tribute to their courage and a promise that their hopes would live on, a testament to the strength of humanity's spirit and the unbreakable bond of shared ideals that now held the galaxy together.